what is testing with regards to software? There's a lot of strong opinions out there, what we're told we should be doing. Um, I agree. Software needs to be tested. I mean, how can you run something in production and not have tested it? But what does that mean? I mean, when I entered this field back in the late 90s, testing was you built something and you handed it to a test team, and the test team had a 27-page document, a procedure, set of procedures that they would walk through essentially to exercise different functionality. If you uncovered a corner case, they updated the procedure. So in the beginning, testing meant, okay, I got this change. I'm going to hand it to somebody else. And I may not hear back from them for 2 weeks because they may be too busy testing other stuff. So that was what the process was back then. But today we have all kinds of automated testing. Test it yourself. We have a dozen and one assertion toolkits, different kinds of testings. And now you can look at any software textbook from a university program, and what do you have? They start talking about different types of testing: unit testing, integration testing, smoke testing, thread testing, end-to-end testing, white box testing, black box testing. But what's important in all that? It's like, are we getting caught up in the taxonomy and getting lost in the thing? And, there's this one story I shared. It happened to be one of the chapters in my Python testing cookbook that was published back in 2009, but it was sort of a lesson that I discovered was I'd inherited somebody's else's app. I didn't inherit it. I went and asked for it because I'd worked on this particular mission critical app that I make reference to in the intro segment. And I'd worked on that app for 10 years, and I'd managed to hire a new grad that was very talented. So I let him take over the app, and I went over and took over this business office app that did not run 24/7. And in digging in, I realized that it was nobody had gotten this app working yet. The accounts receivable department couldn't use this app, and I had adopted a strategy saying I will not make any contributions without first writing a test case to capture the scenario. You could say it was test-driven design. I was using the test cases for myself to learn how the software operated, and I can tell you it took me 3 weeks to get the first test case even written. This was an app that would ingest an Excel spreadsheet. It would process it. It would look for discrepancies and generate an outcome. The way the app had been developed, there were various things where basically the file had to be in a certain folder. I didn't know that when I got started. So I spent 2 days just trying to figure out where is it even looking for the file. And then the end results were in the database. So I had to have a file in a certain location, and then I had to go look for the results in a certain table in the database. And that was very difficult. That was very challenging. And that multiple times I almost gave up, but I said, no, I made this commitment. I'm going to hold to it. So I wrote, you could call it an automated test, it's not what you're thinking of in standards, but it was a JUnit based test case. And it took like 5 minutes to run because it found this gigantic file with 10,000 rows of Excel spreadsheet data. It sucked it into the algorithm. It did all of its processing and mingling of the data, what have you. And then it went and wrote it out to a Oracle database. And then finally, I had to write code to connect to Oracle, go look at a certain table and try to figure out if the results were correct or not. And I looked in there, and well, the results were correct for what I was testing because it was that piece of functionality was operational. So I went and figured that out. But the test case took 5 minutes to run, which sounds ludicrous. And I thought, wait a minute, am I going to write another test case and have it do that too? And I said, yes, I am. I'm going to do that because now I can run this and I have some baseline, some starting point to write one. All the textbooks I'd read were like, well, unit tests should run very quickly. This doesn't sound like a unit test. I don't know. Is this an integration test? Is this a black box test? Black box and white box testing, from what I can remember in textbooks, has to do whether or not you can see the innards of the machinery. Well, I'm controlling the app. It's not somebody else's code. It's my code, but I frankly didn't know what the code was doing. So I don't know. Is that gray box testing? And what I realized quickly was I really don't care. I just want the test. I need the test to verify if I'm doing it right or wrong, or if I'm understanding what's happening. So I realized I don't care if it's a black box or white box test. That was irrelevant. I didn't care whether this was a unit test or not. That was irrelevant. The taxonomy, I realized, was irrelevant in my situation. What was important was I wanted to figure out if I was doing anything correctly. after a few weeks working with this app, I uncovered that somebody had built a abstraction, a sort of a spreadsheet abstraction into the code that made it where you could dereference by column and row. And I found out all the algorithms it was doing that was sort of unnecessary. So I built up a whole bunch of tests, operate, to fix some issues, to make stuff operate. And I felt I had a semi decent understanding of what stuff was happening. So I started ripping that abstraction out. I took it out and found out that the app sped up by a significant amount. It was an unnecessary abstraction. What is it? Yagni, you ain't going to need that, or you aren't going to need it in the proper English. So there's no way I would have done that on day one to pull out what looked like a critical abstraction baked into the stuff. But once I had an operational knowledge and I had a sufficient suite of test cases, I pulled it out, and it didn't cause any havoc. The whole number of users using this app was like six people or something. So I didn't have this fear of somebody at 2 a.m. was going to use the app and call me in after hours. That was never going to happen. So instead, I had a bit more leeway to go work with it because I built up some tests. Well, another situation I ran into, I needed to make a fundamental change to the app. Well, I had not run this test suite, which did I mention that at this point, the test suite took 45 minutes to run. By the time I'd built up a sufficient number of tests, it had got up to 30 minutes. At a certain point, it actually worked its way up to an hour to run the entire test suite that I'd built. And I'd paused and sifted through and made some changes and tweaks. I removed redundant tests and actually shaved it back to 45 minutes. And I said, well, good enough. Let me move forward. I had not run the test suite for 45 minutes because it took 45 minutes. It got in my way. So I had gone a whole week without running the tests, and I decided to make a pivotal change to the software. So I made my tweak, and half the test cases broke. I tried to back up. Let me tweak this. Let me tweak that. No, I couldn't make any progress. The test cases kept breaking. I couldn't figure out where the problem was that I had clearly just introduced. So at the end of the day, because we had version control, I threw away all the changes, all the work for that day. And I think it was a 2-day effort. I think I'd gotten to the end of the second day. I threw it all away. And I said, this is what version control is for. It lets me back up to a point where, okay, here's where I know all my tests are working. So I can do that. Awesome. And that was another one of those lessons I really learned. Sometimes it's best to stop. Just stop what you're doing and back up to where stuff is operational. It was kind of emotional for me because I had invested a bit of effort into making this pivotal change, but I had to let it go. So I came back and I realized, okay, I need to run the test a little more often. Maybe I need to, and I realized also 45 minutes was kind of a little too much for me. So I spent a few days honing the test suite. I got it back down to 30 minutes, and that was more acceptable to me. And I got it going. And I was able to actually go in and implement this pivotal feature, but at smaller steps, running the tests along the way. And I figured out what I'd done wrong. And that was really the whole point of having this test suite, was to be able to make progress, was to be able to, it's like you're climbing up the face of a cliff and you're trying to get the rope in at this point and then at this point so you can make progress along the way. And I felt that it provided me a safety blanket of sorts. And fast forward to a point where I was able to actually take this test suite. My manager had come to me and said they needed a demo for program management. They wanted to see what I was up to. And I said, well, give me a couple of weeks. So I'd shifted to where I actually had test scenarios that resembled more whole threads of using the app. It just sort of I'd managed to get to a point where I could interact with all the systems without going through the user interface. And so I basically had this set of test cases in front of me that simulated what the app was doing. I printed out the test cases and I walked into the presentation and I used it like a roadmap in how to click through the buttons and the menus and so forth and drive the app. And that was the meeting. After I finished the demo, they were very impressed. And that's when I discovered that 6 other people had worked on this app before me and never got it functional. It had never been operational for accounts receivable. These people were processing 300 invoices a month from telco providers, Sprint, Verizon, SBC, and 101 mom and pop shops I'd never heard of. That they had invoices come in, they had to go through them and look for duplicate charges, discrepancies, mischarged stuff, and it would take them these 6 people an entire month to go through all those invoices. The whole idea of this app was to streamline the process, speed it up, and make it more efficient. And so I left that meeting with a better understanding of what my mission was, which is let's get this operational, get these people up and going. So in that situation, it's almost like the testing aspect was sort of secondary. Instead, it was what can I do to bring the value to these people that needed to be operational? And we reached a point where I was able to get them going on the app and they could get the basic stuff going. And maybe they'd have to go fiddle with it manually later on, but it was giving them a leg up in solving their problem. And we finally reached a point that they could do their whole job with regards to these invoices anyway through the application. We started meeting once a week in a conference room, and I used a slideshow. I pulled up PowerPoint on the overhead. They would tell me a scenario. I would type it down in bullet points. This is something, if you go digging in the literature, you'll find is called acceptance testing. The business user is giving me a scenario. I write it down as bullet points in a slide. And then I flip, new slide, new scenario. Each slide, I would have like 5 slides. I would go back to my desk. I would turn the 5 slides into 5 test cases, and I would implement it. And at this point, I'd kind of streamlined the process enough. I had enough knowledge of the system that I could sit there and I could implement new features. I could make alterations as needed in a very efficient manner. And I could roll out a change in the next week with the stuff that they had asked for. And it was sometime shortly after that I remember going by the break room to get a coffee, and 2 of them were in there chatting with each other. And one of them had commented, I got 4 invoices today and I was able to get through all of them. And it wasn't even lunchtime yet. This person had got through 4 of the invoices in like probably what had to be 2.5 hours. Now, remember, they used to take 6 people to get through 300 invoices an entire month span. And here somebody could get through a huge, a chunk of it in no time flat. And that's when I realized this is what I'm really here to do. This is what being a pro coder is all about. I'm sitting there trying to make it where they can do their job, where they can implement this. I may have mentioned the story in other episodes of the Pro Coder Show, but that was a real sense of accomplishment in that they don't care about white box testing and integration testing and thread. That's just taxonomy for us, or maybe it's taxonomy for textbook writers or something. It's almost like the whole point is let's build something so that it can serve other people. So we can, if the test cases were serving me, there's other scenarios like, what about, this app was in-house, so there was no security, if you will. They didn't have to log in and stuff. When you're doing testing and you have a security, like, so you have an app that's visible to the outside world, there's going to be security in there. Something I don't see as much mentioned in all the stuff about the taxonomies of the world and testing is, well, for practical purposes, you need to test the success path. That's very easy to see. I need to test that I can get in and view this web page as an authorized user. What happens if you're not an authorized user? What happens if you're unauthenticated? What's supposed to happen? Are you supposed to get bumped to a specific page? Does the thing do that? What if you are authenticated, but you're not authorized? You're trying to access a manager's page, but you're just the customer service rep. What's supposed to happen there? This is where security turns into this combinatorial explosion of, well, I need to test the good path and the bad path and all these various scenarios. And that's something that's very nice to have in some automated testing. And that's why different platforms, like I know Spring Security has test constructs to help with that. So here's a test scenario, and I'm going to annotate it with users. I can pick a particular user, I can pick what roles they have, and then lay out what they're doing. And so that's where we have another aspect of, here's where testing serves another feature in that let's verify it's doing the right thing in the right scenario. Is it doing the right thing in the wrong scenario? What is happening there? And I like the appeal I get when I look at some of these assertion toolkits. Like one of my favorites is Assert J. Their whole focus is let's make assertions read like sentences where it's very clear that you're demonstrating this particular behavior. Now it's very easy, we have other things and gadgets and thingamabobs to use. For example, we have mocks. Mocks have a certain feature, a certain characteristic where I'm not testing this code, I'm testing the behavior of the code, which is kind of hard to differentiate. But mocks afford us an alternative way of testing, but there's this trade-off, which is the fact is if any of the flow changes, you can break, you can break mock tests, and what you can do is generate work for yourself that you didn't anticipate. You can alter this behavior and it breaks that test because the mock didn't expect that behavior to show up. Whether that's right or wrong, the mock may view it as a breaking change. And so I've done it myself, where I've made the fatal flaw of where I didn't realize to what degree I was just testing the mock. I was verifying the mock works correctly, and it wasn't effectively verifying that the actual system works correctly. So testing isn't free. It's not this universal thing that always lets us, okay, well, if I just do this test here, this is going to be the right path to go down. Well, it depends. There's cases where, I would go into a system and it's like, oh, look, okay, we've got 20 different test classes that cover it. I'm going to change a fundamental flow of the thing, and it's going to hit all of those test cases. So it's like, was there a better way to write those tests? Maybe not. Maybe it really is the change I'm doing is that fundamental and it hits all those corner cases. That's a legit issue. Or it could be maybe my test scenario is not optimal. Nothing is perfect, so we have to take what we can get. But there's a form of debt, technical debt in there about amongst our test cases. And so with all the test cases, are we going to have too much debt to deal with that? Well, that's part of the ebb and flow of being a pro coder. So that's some of the challenges we have. And I wrote a blog article several years ago at gregalturquist.com, and I talked about how I'd become a big fan of automated testing. I like capturing tests. And I'd actually, my first position ever back in 97, when I got hired into a big shop, I didn't write the code. I just tested other people's code. I was manually testing their code, but I started building, I don't know, sort of an automated test. I would print out my assumption of the value, and then I would print out what the function actually generated. And I put them side by side so that I could look at it and see if they were the same value. It didn't think of putting some form of assertion logic in there, but I would print out stuff. And I knew I had a good idea when I saw another software developer borrow my idea and put it in her test cases. So I took that as imitation is the highest form of flattery. But so I've been testing stuff. So I had, I wrote this blog article where I come to accept that I like having automated testing. I don't subscribe to the what to me seems like a very extreme example of where it always needs to be you write the test first and then you write the implementation that satisfies the test case. I think there's situations where that makes sense. And there's situations where sometimes you just have to, you're trying to play with the code first, trying to play around with it, get a feel for it, get it something going that you like. And it's like, okay, now that I like this, let me capture this with some tests, And so I'm not a big fan of what's called test-driven design, which is a very specific flavor of testing. So I think there's sometimes that can work and sometimes where it doesn't work, and some people have other strong opinions on that. So what I'd like to know is, what's your opinion on testing? You can put it in the comments wherever you're watching this. With that, I do want to share that today's episode of the Pro Coder Show is brought to you by 12 Rules for Pro Coders. So what I've mentioned here is that being a pro coder is more than just writing algorithms. It's more than if-then statements and classes and functions and this stuff. There's more to it. There's like meetings and communication, and there's things like continuous integration, processes that we learn about. And a lot of these things are not covered anywhere in any university program or boot camp program. And maybe they're not as widely discussed even on the forums like YouTube or whatnot. I can go find a million videos on how to build a controller or how to build a web page, but trying to decide what are some of the best lessons learned about using particular continuous integration pipelines. Those are maybe a little harder to find some of that content. So I've tried to grab as many lessons that I've learned and put them into this book for you so that you can accelerate your career faster. Now it's almost released. I have it with my editor right now, and since it's not released yet, it's super discounted. So go to 12rules.io and grab your copy today. Now, one thing I always like to do is say I love conversations. I like bringing people in and getting, what's your opinion on this? What's your thought on this? And I was thinking long and hard about the guest that I invited in, is a good friend of mine. who's in the past has helped me run the National Java User Group. And I thought, I know somebody that may disagree with, I don't know, half or all the points that I just made on testing. So why not go get Tim Pote and bring him in with the
Oh, you got applause. That's good.
So
makes me feel very welcome.
welcome to the show, Tim. Tim and I live probably within an hour span of each other, but he helped me run for several years the National Java User Group, which we now turned over to other capable hands, Baruch. But I just thought let's bring up Tim, because I know he's going to have an opinion on testing.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said sounded fantastic to me. I mean, one of the things that stood out was you saying the taxonomy of testing is irrelevant. Like, I see so many conversations where it's just like, oh, I prefer integration tests over unit tests, or I don't do BDD. I do. It's like, I could not care less. what, what, what I want is like, is this thing working? Is it running? Is it useful for other people? Which is what you were focusing on, which is like spot on. I mean, the only other thought I had, well, I guess I have two thoughts. One of them is like, there is a cost to having a big test suite, right? People are just reluctant to do anything that's going to break the test suite. And so you're boxing yourself out of certain solutions that are potentially more effective because it's going to break a bunch of tests, and you're going to feel obliged then to go fix a bunch of tests. And that's a huge time sink, and you know that, and everybody knows that, right? And so, yeah, I've done before. I've deleted bunches of tests because I changed approach, right? and then I had to have discussions about whether it was okay to delete a bunch of tests, which is annoying, you know. So there's a certain momentum that over testing brings, I guess, is a observation more than anything else. You know, does not say it's good or bad.
Yeah, one of the last features I worked on Spring Data JPA before I was told, okay, you're not doing any more Spring, Greg, was I'd found in Data JPA it has like 6 different ways that you can end up building JPA queries. Okay, and I would always end up, I'm over in this corner of the code, or I'm in that corner of the code, or I'm down here, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, the thing that I built helps me here, but wait, I don't have access to it down here. Is there a way I can kind of unify it to where the stuff that is shared is indeed shared? And so I confess I used a little bit of Chat GPT to get me going on it. Like I was like, Chat GPT, do you know the internals of Spring Data JPA? It said that it did. So it may have scanned that. It may have been lying. I don't know. But I had asked it, and it gave me some ideas, and then I went and ran with them, and I started kind of retooling the internal plumbing of Data JPA to be like, I want one flow, and in this scenario, we're going to go out this way, and we'll branch it, but we're going to come back here. And some of that stuff, that definitely broke a lot of test cases. And so I'm sitting there like you're saying, do I make this change or not? And I'm like, I'm making this change. I decided I'm making this change because it's the right thing to do.
Right. Right. But you had to have some kind of moral grounding to go through this pain that you're about to go through.
Yes. And it's like, and so the real question before me, what's the little meme where you're like pushing the red button, like which red button
exactly,
you're sweating, is, do I delete this test case or do I rewrite this test case? And so all my effort is trying to figure out what is the purpose of this test case that I'm staring at. And that's not free time.
No. And, you know, newsflash, there's a lot of like meh tests out there, right? Like the vast majority are going to be meh, not critical, not a linchpin test here, right?
And I can see some like at this point I can look at a test case and say, okay, I'm seasoned enough. This test class here, I could tell was written maybe in the earlier days when they were trying to, you know, get the first ropes up the cliff and they needed to establish something. I'm like, okay, that's fine. It served a valuable purpose then. Is it serving us a valuable purpose today? Do I know enough here to maybe throw away the entire methodology of this test class and rewrite it on firmer ground today? And so there's this whole, oh, I'm going to rewrite this app, and when I'm going to rewrite it, it's going to be better. And then it's like, well, that's bad to do that. And it's like, well, there's somewhere in the middle where maybe it makes sense. This area would benefit if I just rewrote this section. Maybe I rewrote a test class.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And that's an interesting point too. That's an interesting skill that people don't actually talk about that often, is going into a section of code and reading into like the history of it just by reading the text itself, right? Because you can always look at the Git history or whatever. That's helpful. But there's a skill to being able to look at a section of code that's like, oh, so and so wrote this. They're gone. They did some funky things here and there. And you could tell just by looking at it, right, whether or not this is something you should pay attention to, or we're going to maybe delete this test, right?
Now, for those of you that are catching us live, if you go to procoder.io/question, you can find the link. The link is both in the description and it's pinned in the chat, or at least it's pinned in the chat on YouTube. We're broadcasting all kinds of places. Go pose your question. Do you have a question about testing? Throw it in there, and I promise you, I'll make Tim try to give you an answer.
It'd be good. I would love
Let's
it.
back up a little bit, though. I like throwing you into the middle of the lake, but let's catch up and say who is this fine gentleman here today who's being assaulted by his cat?
Yeah, we're gonna have a visitor this whole time through. I thought about that this morning. It's like I could sit here and pet him like an evil villain, but I'm gonna try and keep pushing him off.
So what's your
Hello from
background? Is that
Serbia,
you're a pro
Vladimir.
coder today? Like, how did you get to being a pro coder? Like, what's your
Yeah. So here, strap in. It's a long story. All right. So, I went to high school in Arkansas. That's where I'm from, Southwest Arkansas, a little town called Hope, Arkansas, right near Texarkana. And I went to high school there, and then went to college at Hendrix College in Central Arkansas. So I got my degree I got a double major in music and in physics. And my music undergrad was because I got a stipend to play music. And the physics side, I told myself when I signed up for it was, well, I need something, practical that I can use to make money down the road because I know I'm not going to make money as a musician. And it turns out like 18-year-old brain doesn't really fully make all the connections you need to. Physics is not practical. It was fun. It was interesting. I did some fun things. But one of the things I did when I was studying physics was I worked for a summer. I worked as an intern on a particle accelerator experiment where I was helping design the database that was going to collect the data from the particle accelerator experiment. And so I had to learn SQL, and I had to learn Perl, and I learned a little bit of Vim in that time frame as well, and in command line stuff. This was my junior year. I started to do a little bit of coding for the first time in my life, and it was interesting. I found myself staying late at the office, continuing to try and make things work. I wrote some hilariously bad code in this time frame, but it was good. So I graduated a couple years later. I didn't really do anything more with code. I worked with my now father-in-law at his law office for a year. This was in the midst of the 2008 financial crisis, right? Which it's a fun time to be graduating college with no real world skills at all. So yeah, I worked for him for a year. Definitely knew how to get out of there. I started studying Java nights and weekends. All of the coursework for my college's Java class was free online, and so I worked through all the coursework for Java, and then I went to Germany for 6 months.
Wow.
I got an internship at a company called Miele. They make dishwashers and vacuum cleaners and consumer appliances. So I went over there, and I found myself once again doing a lot of programming to aggregate data from test runs we were getting from medicinal washers. So these are washers that are designed to get like dental bits sterile, right? So they're souped up washing machines. And so I was doing a lot of data collection on those, and so I had a bunch of stuff numbers I had to crunch. So I ended up writing like VS, whatever, I forget what, VB Basic, right? Visual Basic.
Oh yeah.
To crunch through a spreadsheet. Ended up doing more programming, and I was like, I like this programming thing. So as I'm prepping to come back to the States, I'm frantically applying to every job I can possibly imagine. I mean, I was applying to nonprofits because I had done, organizational work before. I was applying to, anybody who would take an application because I needed a job coming home from the States. And I found on Craigslist an ad for a small company in Nashville that was doing financial modeling. And I answered the ad, and they came back with like an interview, a short, prep interview with the recruiter, and he had me run through a couple of questions, and then I went through the broader interview, which they handed me a project that was like half done, and they wanted me to more or less complete it. And it took me a solid week of just banging my head against the wall. There's a bunch of technologies I had no idea about, like Java Beans and Spring. Spring was in there, Hibernate. It was running on Tomcat, right? All these things I had never heard of in my life. And I'm just like scrambling around trying to get this project completed. And I did. And it took a week, but I got the project fully done, turned it in, and it turns out I was the only one to fully complete all the steps of the project. And so I got the job. It was very, very low paying for the market at the time, but I had no skills and they were willing to teach me, and that was part of the deal. And so it was a trade I was super happy to make. And so, yeah, spent the first couple of years at that place. I don't know if you want to get further into the career or not, but
Well, that's interesting. One thing I remember is, I moved up into the Nashville area around 2013, and soon after that is when I launched the Java user group, because I'd met one person at a .NET conference that used to be there, DevLink, and so it's a .NET conference, and I met this one other person that did Java, and we are like, we've got to do a Java user group, but somewhere in 2017, I had gone on a team trip to Germany with my Spring Data colleagues. And when I came back, I remember we got together, I think it was later that year, and I must have mumbled something about speaking German, and you were like, I could speak some German. Let's try to just sit here after the jug meeting is over, and we're sitting at a pub in Nashville. Let's see how long we can talk in just German. And I was like, okay, I'm game for that. Let's try that. I'm like, let me say that. And so that was I remember
completely
that,
forgot about this,
fondly.
but this sounds just like me.
But that was
I can speak a little. I speak okay. I can hear a lot better than I speak nowadays. But
I thought
good.
that was funny. We have now we have it's an internet. This is an international show. Vladimir says hello from Serbia. Hello, Vladimir. Thanks for visiting the show. But
Yeah,
the that's the thing. It's like, I remember, like, I've got textbooks on shelves, and actually I've used some of this time off to go to sift through and be like, what books do I no longer need? I have some books like the Dragon book for compiler construction. I will never let that book go. It's the irony is that book retails today on Amazon for about the same price that I bought it back in college days. But other stuff, I have like an Oracle SQL book. Okay, if I need to know SQL, I'm not digging into that book, so I let it go. But some of these software engineering books that are like, let's talk about let's talk about testing. I was like, okay, well, that sounds like an important topic to talk about. And what I realized is some of the stuff is they start talking about the taxonomy. I think they mean well in that let's describe it, let's ascribe it attributes, but I think people have seized the wrong parts of that discussion when it comes to testing. It's like, okay, that's a nice thing to know, but I see, I'm a sucker for these meme ads where somebody who's like, unit testing is a drawer on Rails. Okay, we need to make sure that the drawer runs correctly on Rails. I mean, that is its primal function. And then here's another drawer that runs on Rails. But here's the integration test: is the two drawers,
right,
hit each other, and you can't open them all the way.
right. My thing is always like, you really should, unless you're like providing a platform as a company, and so the API is the product. You really should be clicking through and seeing, hey, does this feature that I'm working on still work? What is the experience for this user? I think most developers, it would be well served to spend at least some amount of time towards the end of every cycle confirming that what the user is experiencing is the outcome that we want. Which, yeah, I mean, that serves the same purpose as an integration test. I'm just never sure that it's like, is it best to codify that and like put it out of sight, out of mind, or is it best to keep it front of mind, the thing that you're delivering, right? I tend to fall on the latter, but
And that's right. It's something like I could not, like one of the later, like, so in all the textbooks that I had, because I went to college back in the early 90s. In the early 90s, the words acceptance testing didn't exist. So nobody talked about acceptance testing. So by the time that flavor of testing emerged, it sort of was late for me to think about adopting it. And it's not until I was sitting in that conference room and I'd had the epiphany. I learned one of my favorite design tools, software design tools, is called Microsoft Word, because it's like, let me just write down what you're saying and capture that as bullet points or whatnot. And I thought, let me use PowerPoint in this conference room because the font is big, and let me capture those 5 steps that you're describing to me. And I'm back at my office capturing this scenario, and I was like, wait a minute, that was an acceptance test, wasn't it? That was like an acceptance test. I was like, now I get it. And I'm like, and I'm at the same time, I'm looking at the people that I'm interacting with. The manager for the accounts receivable people is a business analyst. And so business analysts absolutely love Microsoft Access because it's a spreadsheet on steroids. They're like, this is a spreadsheet database under the hood, and they can write SQL statements on top of it. So it's like pivot tables move over, pivot tables are real powerful, but move over. It's like select statements to business analysts are gravy. And I was like, okay, well, the thing was like with Access is it's like, okay, you can build all this stuff. Is any of it testable? How much of it is functional? It's up to them to sustain all that, which is like a bugbear. So we would have the phenomena that the back office business on that contract, they would go build all their little tools and Access. And when it reached to the point of unmanageability, when it got too big for them, they would then come to us and say, could you build us an app for this? Could you replace our Access database with an app? And we're like, we'd look at it and be like, that's a 3-month task right there, dude.
yeah,
But
it's all of the things that you've built around it to make it work. I mean, that's the interesting thing is the vast majority of work in software engineering is actually not, for at least for me, is not the programming bit. It's rearranging the company or whatever is going on around the software to make it work. Actually deliver the value to whoever it is that you're trying to get it to at the end of the day. I mean, I've worked on multiple projects where that bit was either entirely forgotten or mostly forgotten. And so, yeah, you at the end of the day, it's like I worked really hard. I delivered exactly what I thought needed to be delivered, and nobody uses it, which is rough.
One of the transitions of me going from being a junior developer to becoming a per se senior developer was I went to a training course on systems engineering, which all I thought at that time is what a systems engineer was the person that tells me what I just did was wrong. They'd be like, okay, that looks nice. That's wrong. I gotta, huh? And I went to this training class, and they'd had an expression that stuck with me, which was, you have 2 jobs to do. You need to build it right. You need to build the thing right, and then you need to build the right thing. And those are 2 different things. So it's like, okay, there's a correct way to build this, but what you're building may be absolutely wrong. It may not meet. And the nicely coupled with that is that customers don't necessarily write good requirements. The person you're building it for, they may have been told, okay, they know what they need. They've got it in their mind what has to happen. And their boss has told them, write that into a contract language so the engineers can build it. And they're doing their best to translate that into words. And then when they hand it to us, we're trying to implement what we think that they would need. And I could see that was sort of a driving reason for this whole agile methodology of we need more of these feedback loops to be like, let's build a little bit. Let's show it to you. Is this what you're talking about? And get the feedback. And let's keep doing the feedback and keep developing it. And I could see the justification for that in Agile, but sometimes I think people got caught up in the methodology itself, just like you're getting caught up in the taxonomy.
Yeah, exactly. No matter what, people are going to get caught up in the taxonomy, right? It's just people. I don't know. What are you supposed to do?
Heard this. I'd heard this philosophy from a guy. I'm trying to remember if it was Daniel Spiewak who'd said it or not, but he was on a podcast, and it was there's this sort of a more of an Eastern philosophy, which was the wording translates roughly into do not give it a name. When you give something a name, people begin to gamify it. It's like it's our nature to do that, and that's what happens when you start
Yes.
naming stuff. It's like, oh, okay, now I need to go learn the rules. I need to go get certificates, and I need to go get accreditation because then I'm going to be a master at that.
I I wholeheartedly agree with that, and it even comes up in my code. I will write, you know, there's a lot of people that will tell you, 5 lines is the max method length. I just could not disagree more with that. I think, yeah, you're on the same boat. But I will write really long stretches of code, almost just to avoid naming. I don't want to put a name to this. This is what we're doing is the thing, right? I don't need 17 names to go along with it because of exactly the problem that you're saying. Like people will see that and either get into fights about is that name proper? Like they're going to spend their time and energy on not the problem, right? Or, or they'll split it up differently or I don't know. It's like it's just not worth it. It's just never worth it, you know?
No, and it's like I see that same concept. It's they display it in that it's in that movie, The Dead Poet Society, when the the person or the substitute teacher towards the end is reading from the textbook, and the textbook talks about a proper paragraph has 5 sentences in it, and it's like I don't know if that's where they got that 5 lines of code thing from. Is a proper paragraph has 5 sentences. Well, I've written books, and my wife has published 22 novels, and the irony is that people that major in English, they have to unlearn more stuff if their goal is to actually become an author, because some of those rules just are flat out wrong. You just have to throw that out. It's if you make every paragraph 5 sentences, it's a very boring book. And it's when I started reading the Jack Reacher book series, and I would see like this whole paragraph is 1 sentence, and the 1 sentence is a fragment.
Yes.
And
It's
you're
not
like,
even, there's
and
no
I would sit
predicate.
there and read through a page. I would read through a page on that book, and I was like, wait a minute. There was that book, that page was covered, had fragments everywhere. It was very like here was a long paragraph, a short paragraph, a long, it was chaotic, but it flowed, and it like gripped me. And it was like, that's what the book is supposed to be, not 5 sentences per paragraph, kind of
Yeah.
nonsensory.
Yeah, one of the epiphanies I've had along the way is that programming is more related to writing a novel than it is as a group. You're writing a novel as a group than it is related to like I don't know building a bridge or something like that, right? I mean, not that I disagree that I think that programming is engineering proper, unlike a lot of other people. I think it is an actual discipline with like things that we can say about it, but the activity itself is more akin to like, oh, there's a big flow of stuff, and I need to figure out how to edit the narrative right here, and we're doing this all at the same time, all in the same book. And we have to make it make sense somehow. It is more akin to that activity than yeah, a lot of other activities.
Candrew Vinay has posted. I'm always in a dilemma when I'm writing code down my code in the right way. With smiley face emoji, and it's like
True story. True
true
story.
story.
But
So
speaking of writing things down, one of the things that you said that that is also one of my kind of like mantras is write things down and not in code, right? In English. Like you were talking to those people, you just transcribing what they're telling you, right? You're writing it down in your PowerPoint. I think that that's a skill that every developer needs to become very, very good at is not only writing down what you're hearing, right? But like with unit tests, write down the test in English before you write it in code. It's going to be a lot faster and you'll clarify your idea a lot faster using regular English than you will trying to funnel it through whatever, programming language you happen to be using right now, because there's a lot of tedium to programming.
I got caught up early in my career. Like I remember, like study like UML and stuff. I don't the dark days of UML. Like so, there's all these tools we had to use at my first company, and they would generate UML diagrams. And then the purveyors of UML tooling had come out with like the architects used rational rows, and they'd come out with this round tripping thing that was like generate these giant UML diagrams. It could then generate code. The code would have tags buried in the comments, so you could go edit the code. And the idea was that you could drag it back into you could make alterations and pull it back into the tools, and they would update. So you could have this round trip effect, and nobody used that because I think they got caught into the as if the UML, as if the diagrams, the actors, and I remember this guy I worked with, he would draw on his whiteboard the stick figure, like an XKCD stick figure, and he would call that actor. And then he would draw another stick figure with a flourished hat and a sword and say Shakespearean actor. Um, and just nobody used that. Nobody used those tools. And it's when that one of the architects that would come by, the company just had a fistful of architects spread across the 3,000 engineers. So they would rotate coming on the contract, and their job every now and then was to come onto the contract, grab the source code, suck it into rational rows, regenerate all the class diagrams, print them on the plotter, and hang them up on the wall. And I was kind of like, for what reason?
Right.
What was
right.
I didn't understand the point of that, but I would one of the guys I was good friends with, and I would chat with him, and he would go, well, if you're needing to write a design, I would just write in Word. Just write down what you're doing in Word. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? I thought the stuff. He was like, nah, just put it in Word.
Right. It's a lot faster, a lot easier. This is, to me, okay. You're touching on the kind of real, this is the core issue at work with all the talk about testing, all the talk about, types, a lot of like build tool conversations, a lot of programming language conversations, a lot of the developer centric conversations. The problem that I have with it is that they all end up becoming like a game within the game. They become a game worth playing for its own sake. And it's just a really natural human inclination to say, oh, I want to get really good at writing tests, and I want to get really good at, talking to the type system, and I want to get really good at, Kubernetes or whatever, right? Like, I want to get really good at these things that in and of themselves are not that valuable. So you're taking focus away from the end-to-end value in order to hyper focus on a thing that might or might not provide value, depends on the case. But I think we as an industry overall just get gamified, right? Like we take to these things that are fun to solve and end up not solving, the real issues that people are having around. Not always, but often, especially in conversation.
If you're enjoying the show, give it a big thumbs up and share it with a friend right now.
Some of the fun I would have with something thing that would give me the warmest fuzzies is just back in September, I was at the latest Spring One conference. It happened to be Spring One at the VMware Explore conference in Vegas, and I was able to chat with Baruch as one of the people. But they would ask us to put time in at the Spring booth, and so I go down there not because it was like, now I got to go to the booth. It was like I like going there because at least in the Spring community, there people are going to come by there. People are excited to come by and talk about Spring, and it's interesting that in conference where we're less than 10% of the conference, we got a huge draw of people to come by there. And I like chatting with people to be like, what's the problem? What is your problem that you're solving today? And people would start giving us the real feedback. It's like, well, in our department, we have 100 apps that we're managing in the cloud. And so they're one of their biggest issues is we want to upgrade from Spring Boot 2 to Spring Boot 3. How do we do that? That's a major data point, because I was like, I didn't know that. And building, working on the portfolio project that I was on, I really wasn't aware of that as a big issue. It's like, how do we do that? And happened to be that one of our developer advocates, Deshaun, was with me at the same time on that, and he jumped into it. He'd actually built a tool using Open Rewrite to assist with that, and so he would share with that. I was like, oh, okay, we're aware of this issue and doing that. But I like talking with people that are actually using the stuff because their insight is epic. It's like, what problems are people really trying to solve? And it's like, is everything, and it lets me put a weight on what I'm doing to be like, okay, these different things have different importance and some things are less important, so I don't need to go jump to them. Here's a kind of put another comment up. Most of the developers nowadays become used to a copy paste game too. Is it fine?
Is it fine? I mean, I've never copied and pasted in my life.
I've
just kidding. I mean, I have, But I generally like sit down and think through the whole problem and then maybe copy paste a piece of it, right?
I did have somebody work for me once. This was just years ago. This was way before I got to the spring team. This was not on the spring team. I had somebody who we'd hired, a new grad, and he copy pasted everything, and he could not process the context that he was in to understand how to tweak it. Understand, okay, here's a chunk of code I found on Stack Overflow, and this seems germane to what I'm solving, but you didn't you needed some extra guard checks to put in there based on the context, and he like couldn't do that. So after about the third time, I had to go to my manager to bring this issue up, and eventually we had to let him go.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But,
what are you going to do? I mean, but it is that thing, like, it's back to the end to end. For me, it's always the end to end, right? You need to know what problem you're solving, and you need to know how to get from here to there, and then you need to think through that before you write any code. And then you write the code, and what part does copy paste have in any of that? None, Now once you get to writing the code, like, I don't know how to do a stable sort or whatever. Okay, copy paste that, but
right
outside of that.
I think
you talked about go ahead, sorry.
Well, and I know it's a permutation of this is you talked about copy paste code. I'd hired on that contract, that big old contract I worked on at my first shop. We'd hired a consultant to come on site to help me write some code. In other words, he built some stuff. We were building a network operations center, and we had SNMP alarm data flowing into our data center, and we had to correlate it with service outages. This consultant came in. He wrote a system. We had to basically multiplex the data, so the alarms had to be split up into buckets, a different bucket for each device. So the alarms on this device have no bearing on the alarms of that device, and it divvied them up. They also needed to be in order according to timestamp, because if it failed at 0300 but recovered at 0400, then you had 1 hour of outage to be attributed to the customer. So he built a real nice advanced queue system, multiplexing thing, and then after a week, he was gone. And then his code became my code. So he did a great job and worked fine for 6 months. And then I started noticing an error every now and then would sneak into the system. And we had started with 80 sites of alarm data, and it eventually reached about 3,000 sites reporting data. So the volume of data was growing over time. And eventually we had enough influx of data that we could have an event, a fault and a clear come in with the same timestamp to the second. And his algorithm would take them and flip them because it used a less than sign instead of a less than equal sign in his algorithm. And that took
all right, everybody, listen up. Do not use timestamps for global ordering. Do not use timestamps for global ordering. It will not work. It doesn't work. It never works.
I think they had stratum clocks everywhere, but anyway, but that was a fun one.
I guess unless you Google
cover.
In Google, they have like these atomic clocks attached to their databases.
But I'm checking. I don't think I was Google. So
yeah. Oh man. But you mentioned a second ago talking to your customers. That's one of those that's like, I really wish that it was more kind of industry standard to do that. When I was doing this one project for Cisco, big company, Cisco, I spent 6 months, 8 months on a thing, released this big heavy lift, right? And I was so excited for people to use it. And I wanted to talk to the salespeople and get them to push it, and talk to the service reps and get them to push it and, teach them how to use it. And it was just like, it was just not going to happen, right? Like the company's too big. You don't talk to people at that level, but to me, that's the bread and butter. I mean, that's why you do it, right? Like, I want to see the people get value out of it, and I really wish it were industry standard to do that.
I had watched on that contract. They'd initially launched it. Why they'd managed to shoe in people that had been on the incumbent contract that had worked with that customer for years, and so they had a keen insight and knowledge. So that was a good maneuver. But at a certain point, we realized we had various chronic issues that were happening. There were certain devices that would just always generate outages that weren't real outages, for example. And they had actually picked one of our highest ranking software engineers to take over as the ops manager. And he applied kind of a different methodology. The person that had been there before, nothing wrong with it, but his job is to just manage, sort of keep things humming along. And this new guy came in who was really a software engineer instead of a maintenance guy. And he had this strategy of if we're getting chronic outages that are not real outages, let's look for a solution. And he had enough insight to say, well, I realize this is what the contract says. Let me have a discussion with the customer and see if they would be open to an amendment to the contract and say, look, we're willing to take these, the outage, it went down here and it came up here. So this is the window of outage time you get credit for. But if we've got the timestamp in the database, let's wait until later to actually declare there was an outage after we confirm it. Let's confirm it and then we can apply the timestamps after the fact to meet the contract obligations. And the customer was like, well, we didn't think of that. That's a great idea. And there's a reason that particular person I knew got promoted to level 6 engineer, for which the company I was at only had 2 or 3 of those people. Was he was able to think, let's go interact with the customer and let's try to solve they'd stood up a side team of like a dozen people to deal with the volume of chronic outages that were phantom outages. They'd had a whole team stood up and it was costing them overhead. He's like, let's alter the fundamental contract here to make a better solution.
Right. I mean, you really want to be involving the people that are going to be using your stuff in the solution discussion. They will tell you things that you do not know. For sure. 100% of the time.
And that was one of the methodologies I enjoyed about back in the days when it was Pivotal Software, and how we gotten the namesake for that from this other company that had been started up. It was based on extreme programming, so they were everything was pair programming, and it's like that's an intense effort. But what they would do is they would pair up. You'd have a partner maybe for this week that you would work with on the same piece of code, and then you'd rotate partners. So that was a form of knowledge transfer. Well, they would get the customer to come in and pair up. So at times, if the customer was willing, able, and in the area, they would come in and do that. And so that's a way to transfer knowledge of the stuff to the customer. And the customer could be saying, okay, now I get it. Or the customer could be saying, wait, this is wrong. We need to go back. We need to back up and go fix that. And so that was extreme programming. First of all, is rather extreme. I met people of differing. Some people are extroverted, some people are introverted, and for different people, that's a different amount of taxing energy. So something not really my cup of tea, but I could see where the benefit was if you can pair with the customer. I mean, where else do you see anything like that happening?
Right. No, that's brilliant. I never would have thought of that. That's an interesting approach to kind of integrate them into that common practice. And just bring them along for a full day. The thing is, like, it doesn't even necessarily matter what you're doing. You kind of just want to be spending time with them. So it's like just a good excuse to spend time together and let them talk about how they work, talk about what they're concerned about, talk about what they're doing. That's great. Extreme programming is tough though. It's I don't think there's anybody that comes to the end of an extreme programming day and isn't just more, or pair programming day even, right? And isn't just more tired. It
Drained.
Requires more of you, even extroverts.
And it's like the spring team per se didn't adopt that practice. That was more the consulting wing of, we're building this website for this contract, for this consulting contract, and they would adopt that. But the spring team, well, first of all, we just didn't have enough people. The spring team has always been incredibly tiny, and it was like that's when I left the company where I was on a contract that had 60 software engineers for one contract. That's like a relatively huge team from a company that had 3,000 engineers. And I got onto the spring team to find out all the portfolio projects are maintained by a team of like 50 people. And I was like, how? I don't comprehend that. But it's like, it's a different focus. It's a different, whole different, there's different checks. The other thing I learned about was there's also a difference between, are you building application code for an end user, or are you building framework code that's used by millions of people spread across thousands of companies, and that
Right.
it's a different layout of, a lot of times it's just no, we're not going to implement that request. No,
Right.
that's not general enough for the tool. That's what you get with toolkits. No.
Right. Right. I mean, there's a process of convincing, right, that you have to do to get a feature in. How many projects were in the portfolio again?
I have to look at it. It's like there's the Spring Framework, Spring Integration, Spring Boot, Spring. There's 15 different Spring data modules that are currently supported by the data team itself. So it's like Data JPA, Redis, MongoDB, Cassandra, and then some smaller ones. Which also there's a Spring Batch. But
So a few dozen.
Look at it.
Few dozen probably.
But it's like that's the realization. We'd be at a spring conference and we'd be sitting at a table, and that was a chance to go, you can meet with the community. They formed the spring conferences had been launched way back in the mid 2000s as a way to bring a distributed team together. The spring team said, let's get together face to face so we can meet, and we'll also put on talks and presentations to talk about the product, so that the community, the most active members of the community can come on site and also meet the team, and we can interact directly with the community. So you'd be sitting at dinner and there's like 3 project leads sitting at the table with 7 people from the community, just, really shooting the breeze on this, that, and the other of the technology stack. And it's a real interactive way to find out, okay, what do you use it for? How are you using it? And it's like you're meeting with the leads of the project that can take that kind of feedback back to apply changes.
Actually do something with it. Yeah, no, people will happily talk to you if they feel like you can do something for them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not hard. But yeah, thinking way back when I write things down. I have a little note sheet. And way back when I had another point about tests.
You preach.
Exactly.
You're telling us to write it down and you're doing it yourself. So
you can, I honestly, I cannot tell you the amount of mental load you lift. If you know exactly what you're doing, you have it all written down, the whole plan, before you start writing code. Like, you will just be a more relaxed, chill person, just all around, if you start doing that. But the point was, the other big reason why you want to use tests, I heard for you using tests, was that you were using them to get feedback about as you were writing a program, right? You're using it to get feedback, and is this a good change? Is this not a good change? And the other thing that I wanted to bring up is there is more than one way to get that kind of feedback. You can use, in the language that I have, we have a REPL, right? It's integrated into the editor. And so I can be building a program and make small, tiny tweaks and see the effects of those tweaks, immediately. I'm just constantly running the program, checking what I did. Was this a good change? Not a good change? That's how I develop, actually. I don't write a bunch of tests because I'm testing constantly, running the code as I go, on board what I'm doing. It's unique to the language that I have, but it is very, very powerful.
See, so what I'm hearing you saying is that you're ready to start writing a book.
There's been lots of books written. I don't need to weigh in on this one. It's called REPL driven development. If you look up online, REPL driven development, there's lots of blog posts, articles, YouTube videos. People have been talking about it for a while. The language that this is coming out of is the Clojure community, which that's my primary language. There are other languages with good REPLs, but not mainstream ones. The best ones are all Lisp-based languages for lots of good reasons.
And which I had a lot of fun. I went and read. I was able to find it online. It was Practical Common Lisp, the book, and it kind of really walked me through. I had studied Lisp in college, and that was dry, academic, and boring, and so I didn't retain next to any of that. But I went and read Practical Common Lisp, and I was like, "This is cool. This is kind of neat." Now I see the point, and that was very intriguing. So, and this is the other reason I was like, I got to get Tim to come on the show here, because he has a perspective I don't have, and I've noticed when I talk, I've found that, like, I know what this world, this part looks like, but if I, oh my,
you get gestures. I think this might be. It's just part of Apple. I thought I had turned mine off. No. Okay. Just the heart.
It's like
Okay.
it's like in the stream. Okay. But I would find out I had worked at the time frame when I had worked at some of the biggest shops. Tim here I'd met in Nashville had worked at some of the smallest shops, and so I liked hearing his angle on stuff. And then it's like, okay, I've worked in I used to do C++, but I migrated to Java long ago. And so it's like, well, he's using Clojure, which is a totally different paradigm thing. And I was like, let me hear what he's got to say, because I would also talk to my brother-in-law who's been in the .NET world for his like entire career, and it's like he's talking about stuff I've never heard of. And so every time I go talk to somebody, I'm like, what is this person doing that I'm not doing? This friend of mine works in C++, and Rust, and he works with video files. He's gone and read the MPEG specs to interact with that. I'm like, that's part of what I want to do with the show is find pro coders, bring them onto the show, and be like, what are you doing that I'm not doing? I can't share it all, and let me find the people that have a different perspective. What's this like when you're on a team of 20 people versus 200?
Yeah, no, it's weird. And the interesting thing for me about Clojure, there's a lot of takes out there. Most of them are probably partially correct. There's a certain pomposity. Thanks, Kendra. That a lot of Clojure developers have that I don't particularly appreciate. But for me personally, it's been a very big step for me in terms of personal growth and like learning about how to think about programs and learning about how to structure programs in a way that's effective. I don't think I could have learned it in any of the traditional OO or even procedure-based languages. It took a lot of discipline, but using that for me really taught me a lot about program building, to the point where most of my time is not spent thinking about code. I actually don't think about code that often. I spend talking to people, trying to figure out what they need, talk, and then very little of my time then is condensed into, I can just pound this out. I know exactly how I need to structure it. I know exactly how this needs to go, But years of discipline.
That's cool. Well, let me wrap it up here. I want to thank Tim for coming on to the Pro Coder Show as part of our Meet a Pro Coder segment. And I want to remind everybody that you can catch it here live on the various platforms that we're at, or you can subscribe and get the podcast over at podcast.procoder.io. And as soon as we hang it up here, I'm going to pull it down and throw it onto Spotify to get to, so you can find it everywhere, Apple Podcasts, what have you. It's going to go until it's not going to go as Google Podcasts, because they're supplanting that with YouTube. But I want to thank everybody for coming out today's episode.
Yep. Thanks.
This episode is over, but your code writing journey continues. Visit procoder.io to find links and resources to help you become a pro coder.